She was the world's first iron-hulled armoured battleship. She is the sole surviving warship of Queen Victoria's Black Battle Fleet, which when constructed was the largest, fastest, and most powerful of her day. But in 1924, she was left to rot for 50 years. She only survived because she was a nightmare to dismantle, a fortress of iron so defiant that even the shipbreakers couldn't tear her apart for the scrapyard. She was abandoned and forgotten. Yet, her fortunes changed when an ambitious rescue was undertaken. The ship was towed 800 miles from South Wales, all the way to Hartlepool. The journey was a treacherous operation that required massive tugboats to pull the heavy, unpowered iron shell through the Irish Sea. This rescue led to a massive £8 million restoration that, against all odds, saved her from the scrapyard. This is the incredible true story of HMS Warrior. The launch of HMS Warrior in 1860 represented the most profound shift in naval architecture since the invention of the sail. At a time when the British Royal Navy relied on the wooden walls that had won the Battle of Trafalgar, the sudden emergence of ironcladding technology threatened to upend global power dynamics. When the French launched the Gloire, a wooden ship armoured with iron plates, the British Admiralty realised that their entire fleet had become vulnerable. Their response was not merely to match the French, but to overwhelm them. Warrior was conceived as a ship that would be faster, more heavily armed, and more structurally sound than anything else afloat, marking the birth of the modern battleship. Constructing Warrior required a leap of faith into uncharted engineering territory. Unlike the Gloire, which used wood as its primary structural material, Warrior featured a revolutionary hull built entirely of iron. This allowed her to be significantly larger than any wooden ship could ever be without risking structural failure in heavy seas. To protect her from enemy fire, her designers created an armoured citadel in the centre of the ship. This section was shielded by 4.5 inches of wrought iron backed by 18 inches of solid teak. During trials, this armour proved to be virtually invulnerable to any gun then in existence, effectively making the ship a floating fortress that could dictate the terms of any engagement. The ship was a fascinating hybrid of two distinct eras of maritime technology. She was fitted with a massive set of sails that could spread over 48,000 square feet of canvas. Yet she also housed the world's most powerful steam engine. This dual propulsion system ensured that she could traverse the globe using the wind to save coal, while still possessing the ability to maneuver with mechanical precision during a battle. Her armament was equally transitional, featuring a mix of traditional smoothbore muzzleloaders and the cutting-edge Armstrong breech-loading guns. This combination of speed, protection, and firepower earned her the nickname the Black Snake among the French, who realised their own fleet had been eclipsed before it was even completed. Despite her terrifying potential for destruction, HMS Warrior never fired her guns in a true naval battle. Her career was defined by the concept of deterrence. She was so dominant that her mere presence in the English Channel was enough to prevent conflict. The transition from the world's most formidable predator to a forgotten hunk of metal was a slow and undignified descent. As the 19th century drew to a close, the rapid evolution of naval gunnery, specifically the move toward massive, rotating turrets, meant that Warrior's fixed rows of guns along her sides were no longer efficient. By the turn of the century, she was stripped of her dignity and her name, renamed Vernon 3 to serve as a floating torpedo school. Eventually, even that utility faded, and she was towed to Pembroke Dock in Wales in 1929. Her magnificent engines were gone, her masts were chopped down to stumps, and her upper deck was paved over with thick, ugly layers of concrete and bitumen to provide a stable walking surface for sailors refuelling modern ships. During these decades of obscurity, Warrior survived only because she was too well built to be easily destroyed, while other legendary ships were sent to the breakers for scrap. The sheer thickness of Warrior's iron hull made her a nightmare to dismantle with mid-century tools. She sat in the oily waters of Wales, largely forgotten by the public, acting as a literal bridge between the shore and the tankers that tied up to her iron sides. It wasn't until the late 1960s that historians and maritime enthusiasts began to realise that beneath the layers of grime, concrete, and bird droppings lay the most significant warship in the history of naval engineering. The ship that had once defined an empire was slowly rotting, and a desperate race began to raise the funds necessary to pull her back from the brink of being sold for scrap. The rescue of Warrior began with an epic and perilous 800-mile journey in 1979, a feat of salvage that captured the imagination of the British public. To get her from Pembroke Dock to the restoration slipways in Hartlepool, tugs had to pull the massive, dead weight of the iron hull through some of the most treacherous waters in the British Isles. Lacking her own power, masts, or steering, the ship was a helpless giant at the mercy of the sea. There were moments during the tow when the aging iron hull groaned under the pressure of the Atlantic swells, and many feared that the ship might find her final resting place at the bottom of the ocean rather than in a museum. However, the iron skin that had once been designed to deflect cannonballs held firm against the waves, and she finally arrived in the northeast of England to begin her transformation. The restoration process in Hartlepool was a monumental undertaking that lasted 8 years and cost millions of pounds. It was a project of forensic engineering. Workers had to meticulously chip away the decades of concrete and oil that had encrusted the ship. Because Warrior was a unique transition ship, many of the parts required to restore her, such as her massive wrought iron fittings and specific Victorian rigging, simply did not exist anymore. Blacksmiths and shipwrights had to rediscover lost 19th century techniques to recreate her world. They rebuilt her grand cabins with polished wood, reinstalled the massive Armstrong guns, and even recreated the sailors' mess tables to match original blueprints. When she finally sailed back into Portsmouth in 1987, she was no longer a derelict oil jetty. She was a gleaming, black and white vision of Victorian power, restored so perfectly that she looked as though she had just been commissioned by the Queen herself. A centrepiece of the National Historic Fleet, Warrior stands defiant at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard alongside legends like Victory and Mary Rose since 2017. She has been a crown jewel of the National Museum of the Royal Navy, funding her own survival as a premier venue while guarding an exclusive archive that remains locked from public eyes in 2026. Thank you very much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more.